This is JILLIANA Ranicar-Breese, and this is part 3 of my interview with David Crean. David, tell me about trauma, because you're a specialist in trauma.
I'm not sure that I am a specialist. But
Well, it sounds to me like you are.
I certainly have some experience there.
Exactly.
With people. Yeah.
I mean, you're not a psychologist, but you are a counsellor and a healer.
Yeah.
And you come across people who have experienced very bad trauma, having been in wars and tortured and so on. So tell me, what do you mean by trauma?
Well, yeah, I mean, trauma is really any experience that we can't resolve at the time, which of course would be true if you're, if you've been in a war zone and you've seen appalling things, or you've been, had some other kind of shock experience, or at a very extreme end, torture, for instance, which is something that's premeditated and done with the explicit purpose of removing your sense of self. That's a UN,
identity.
Your sense of self.
Yes.
And that's a UN, part of the UN definition of torture. So the question for me has been, and is the question for us all, is how do we get out of that loop, which is an unconscious loop of thought, feeling, thought and emotion, which works underneath the radar unconsciously. And how do we get that part of the nervous system to talk with the conscious part of the nervous system, the part that we're aware of? This is why on a mundane level, somebody will say something like, oh, I know cigarette smoking is bad for me, but I can't stop, right? So on one level, it's addiction, but on another level, there's something unconscious that is going on. And when something unconscious is going on, it has a much more powerful voice, if we want to use that word. It has a much more powerful effect than the part of the conscious prefrontal cortex part of the brain that is attempting to tell you what is and what isn't. So a trauma is anything that's unresolved and is being refreshed as memory, so that it's not that it's re-happening, because the trauma is something that's happened in the past, but it is being refreshed in the present, often unconsciously. We're not quite aware that that's going on. So it's something that sort of can get triggered, and it can get triggered by a sound or what somebody says, or even just by a look. So we know this without it being trauma. You could go home to your birth parents and they could give you one look and suddenly you feel like you're 5 years old again, in the same way that, if you have children, your child can look at you and you bing, and you're they've got you. So this is an unconscious process that goes on. And the thing is that when we're talking about trauma, the trauma is something that is active, that you cannot, the nervous system has no direct link with the part that is, let's say, the critical part of the mind, which is conscious. There's no connection. We know this biologically. So the journey, if you like, or the process of healing is to bring those together. So that requires, in a sense, a third party, if you like. And I don't mean a therapist outside, but some other part within ourselves that is able to connect these two. So this happens when we are able to recognize, first of all, to be able to have awareness when something is active, so when the trauma is activated, because often people are not, right? They just go into a behavior, and people can be, for instance, just to use something very mundane, they can be in great anxiety or great anger and be unaware that they're very anxious or angry. And if you point it out to them, hey, you're really angry, they might even say something like, I am not angry, you know. Right? So we know this even for
They
people
need
who
anger management.
well, even for people who are not, you know, necessarily traumatized, you know, that
Yeah.
can be like that. So that's
You've
that's,
said all this helps yourself. What's your own experience?
well, if I go back, the working in the theater and learning about emotions. I'll tell a story as a way of illustrating.
Is
what I
it a
mean.
short story or
It's
a
very
long
short.
story?
It's very
Okay.
short.
No, because I'm looking at the timing. That's
It's
why.
very short. I'll be brief.
Okay. Okay.
Which is that I had no understanding. Really, I didn't understand how emotions and body language and your thought process is connected. And I had a part to play in which I had to. The part required me to cry. And I had been trained, so I had all this training to
It's not easy.
create, you know, all these things to, you know, sort of make me feel sad in the moment and so on, and trigger those things. And it just wasn't working. It just simply wasn't working. And the director was very blunt, and he just said, why don't you just put on a sad face? Just put on a sad face, Dave. And that's what I did. And the extraordinary thing was that I was bawling my eyes out within seconds. Within
Show me a
really
sad face.
well, it's just, you just put a sad face on, and eventually you're going to start to feel something happening. It just does. See what I mean? It doesn't take much. So this is an example of the physical body leading your emotions and thought processes, because usually what we do is we think, I have to feel something first. This is the physical. This is just something physical leading it. I think I may have said that wrong, but it's the physical that can lead it. So if you walk along the street and your head is down and you're looking down at the ground all the time, you begin to things close in on you, right? Yeah, when you walk, you must walk with confidence. Well, this is why one of the things that happens with trauma is that's so necessary is to get people out into the forest or somewhere where you're out of the city, and you start looking around. You hear a bird, you look up, you see a bird, or something's rustling over there.
Nature.
You look, you see nature, the squirrels moving or something, and this gets your eyes moving around. One of the things that happens with trauma is that your eyes get fixed, and your brain. Essentially, what's happening is that the muscles that move the eyes have got blocked. But it could work the other way around. You see, if you have your eyes fixed, I had a young man come in with anxiety, and he presented a real anxiety, and he said, "I'm getting these panic attacks. What can you do?" And it seemed to me. I mean, the standard approach would be you would find out, okay, well, what's caused these panic attacks from an emotional point of view, something that happened in his life. But it seemed very clear to me, perhaps because of all the experience that I'd have, he didn't have some of the aspects that showed, right? I'll just finish. Can I just finish this off? And he actually turned out to be. He was young, and he worked in some kind of computer startup, and that meant that he was looking at a TV screen, a monitor, a computer monitor, for sometimes like 9-10 hours at a stretch. So his eyes were fixed at about 14-inch distance from the screen. And that meant you know, in terms of the focal length of his eyes and the muscles and so on were held, and his brain read that as trauma. It's the other way around.
Fascinating.
So as soon as we established that he just needed to look away from the screen, we actually used an egg timer, and about every 10 minutes it went ding, and he looked up, and he had a window, and he could look up outside, and the panic attacks went away.
Well, they do say that you have to break state when you are working with computers. You get up, go out, have a break,
And
have a Kit Kat.
And EMDR is about that. Is a whole process of working with getting eye movement to break that
REMs. Yes. Okay, I think we'll end there, David. I'm getting a bit tired, and it's also getting dark. So thank you very, very much, and maybe we'll continue next year.
Lovely.
With more experiences and more stories. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.